Cade the Trickster. We had to do politics half the year and economics the other half. I'm talking about having them as separate classes for the 4 years. Yes, we have the ability to find the information ourselves, but going through school was my job, so I had all the time and resources to learn what was required, even if I didn't want to learn it. Now that I have a job, I have to find time to learn the things rather than using the time I'm at work. Also, I have to find the information and check to make sure it's correct. When in school, they have all of that for you, and the things you look up yourself in school are checked by a professional. I've learned a lot from school that I'm glad I know that I would never have learned if not for going to school, and there's a ton of things I wish were covered in school so that I would know them now without having to look it up during my free time. Ellen Morin to Dronai. I've mentally toyed with the idea of Heinlein's citizen vote from Starship Troopers. Except rather than one military service being required for citizenship, you could also work some kind of public service job for a specific period of time. Crabstabber. Federal service in Starship Troopers was not limited to joining the military. There were other avenues akin to public works, which were also extremely taxing. Jewish Elvis. So, isn't the society in Starship Troopers supposed to be an analog for the Republic? Thorax. Having to qualify for government service positions is the flaw in this. People can influence selection criteria to exclude those seeking citizenship through service. Accepting democracy as not perfect but good enough is acknowledgement of humanity. All systems of government have someone in charge, someone who puts them there, and someone to follow orders. Remove any of those elements and it will collapse. Ellen Morin Tendrai. It's been ages since I last read the book. That bit of the Federation government always seems like a good idea, though. The rest, though? CPT cringe. Profession alone is a poor proxy indicator for merit qualification to vote. Elon Morin Tendrani. I looked at it more as if you would like to vote and be involved in governance. First, you should spend a certain amount of time doing public service. Astralahara. People say S like this and it gets upvoted, but I say only net taxpayers should be able to vote and get downvoted into oblivion. LOL. Gala Zion 24, because this would be compulsory or practically compulsory, and you'd get your rights to vote full stop. If we say only net taxpayers should be able to vote, it creates poverty. Either the poor segments of society do not get welfare benefits, or they do get them at the expense of voting rights, at which point their interests will be even more ignored than they normally are. In either case, you're just intentionally disregarding the poor and making the poor poorer. It's absolutely nothing but classist discrimination. Besides, does the student or the unemployed or the stay-at-home parent not deserve a say in the way the country is run? You're just flat out discriminating against people who happen to be in situations of social classes. Not my PO blank account 40. Just have to be a net taxpayer, in my opinion. It may help to prevent voting for free stuff. Galaxion 24. And why is voting for free stuff so bad? Comprehensive welfare systems are largely good by every metric. Income redistribution is a good thing. You're not against populism with this. You're just suppressing politics you don't like. Not my PO blank account 40. I can't tell if you're joking or not. Galaxion 24. There's nothing inherently wrong with income redistribution schemes, and selectively giving voting rights only to those who have a vested interest in some economic policy is nothing more or less than voter suppression to ensure the domination of a given policy and or ideology. In practice, it would just mean that the interests of those who can't vote are ignored in favor of those who can, effectively keeping the poor poor. For those in financial trouble, it can also subject people to inhumane choice. Go hungry or give up your right as citizen. Again, why is it morally wrong for someone who needs insulin to vote for a party which gives it to him cheaper or free? Why is it morally wrong for someone who is unemployed to vote for unemployment benefits? Why is someone who works a minimum wage job wrong to vote for a party that will pay for their children's schooling? Moreover, why are these things so inherently wrong that you would have to ensure that they never have a voice in society? And again, why would you disincentivize people from taking welfare benefits to get back on their feet, thus leading to greater impoverishment? I cannot think of a way in which your proposed policy could lead to a good thing outcome. Not my PO blank account 40. Free stuff is bad for people's psyche, and welfare gone amok destroys communities. I'm not saying it's all bad and never necessary, but you could argue it's already gone too far, and that free stuff has become a strategy to win votes rather than good policy. Galaxion 24. Unlikely to be the case. For instance, there's always natural unemployment in a competitive market, so unemployment benefits are needed, and attempts to tie it to the recipient actively searching for a job have not shown results. All welfare which can be considered in some way infrastructure or basic services like healthcare and education is always worth it. I won't say that policies can't ever be inefficient, but that's unlikely to
have to do with the amount and rather more likely
have to do with how it's structured. And in the event that you happen to be American and make this claim of it having gone too far with relevance to America in particular, The only valid answer to that is LOL no. Not my PO blank account 40. Welfare destroyed the black community and Indian reserves. When people are given things, it destroys them. Over and over again, the nanny state ruins people, and yet it's still advocated for. Blows my mind. Dependent document 3. Yep, big hole in this theory right there. The attitude is right for abuse. Maybe one day when intelligence can be objectively measured through some kind of brain scan, but we aren't there yet. Hidden 47. Even then, who says wisdom or intelligence is the right measure to restrict voting if the only viable way to collectively decide what's right or wrong is through voting? Foo sport. Wisdom, I believe, is more important than intelligence in this case. We do have tests for intelligence, albeit flawed. However, I know of no tests for wisdom. Lost Raccoon. You're right. In this case, wisdom is more accurate. We need rulers who can look for the good of the poor and rich, minorities, but also majority of the people, summing it up. Someone who cares about all perspectives. And for that, we need wise voters who can see through candidates' intention. They always say what is good for them. We need to look deeper. Not everyone does that, though. Anyway, I don't think that there's something to measure wisdom. It's hard to think about a tool that can do that. Dependent document 3. What is wisdom? Empathy. Calm, rational attitude about death. Ability to forgive and not get stressed about small things. Those things can already be measured by observing emotional response to stimulus and scenarios. Bladerunner style. We can already detect sociopathy with brain scan. Brickmaster 32,000. You do realize that in Bladerunner, the test not only did not work, but was used to oppress the entire population. Dependent document 3. Source? I don't remember that part in the film at all. Every time they show the test, it worked. Harry Man back 84. Well, you could obviously rule out anyone who voted Democrat or Republican, so like 45% gets to vote. I don't remember the turnout. Crystal Lily. We have Constitution and economics for a whole year. I know some things about my country's Constitution, but it was boring as heck. But it did impart a bit of knowledge on how we can get laws to be passed if we have enough votes, and how hard they made changing the Constitution. Economics was interesting, though. One thing that really stuck with me when they teach home economics was that they teach us a very basic bookkeeping because it's important if some of us decide to start a business. Our home economics class was basically a small business class. We pool money, buy ingredients, cook food, and sell those to students who have recess lunch, no teacher at that time. Profits were divided among us, and we then decided on what to cook next time. Popular food was pizza, bread, cheese sticks, any street food that can be cooked and served quickly. I perfected my pancake cooking skills in that class. I'm not paranoid. I am HO. Not everyone should be allowed to stand for election, but everyone should be allowed to vote. There should be a standard test and thesis for politicians. They should be made to defend themselves and their views before being allowed to stand for election. It's not a major problem in the USA, but in a lot of other countries, corrupt, nonsensical people get elected. Knight 647. Defend. Service guarantee citizenship. Maybe something like that, but about education, it's not in the demagogue interest to educate you in these topics. Education now is set up to create productive people, not necessarily critical-minded or wise people. Crackajack 87. The educated are just as flawed as the working class. I mean, who was spreading communism in the early 20th century? The educated, and who is spreading CRT and equity today? Academia. The issue is that we are all slaves to the groups we are in, and we all can be easily manipulated and twisted. Maybe Heinlein had the right idea. Maybe people can earn the right to vote. Little Man 88. Every method of voting has potential for corruption. We're watching it happen across the USA right now. At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if you'd rather have control of who gets to vote or if you're okay with leaving that task up to someone else. Again, we're watching this play out across the USA right now. Georgia's catching all of the flack, but it's not necessarily alone, just ahead of the curve. The sad reality is that if you're not helming the controls on voting, someone else will, and they may not be so altruistic. CPT cringe. One counterpoint to minimum information demonstrated to vote criteria, which are akin to less problematic poll literacy tests, is that information about candidates, their positions, and perhaps the general philosophical premise of a Western democracy can be seen as necessary but insufficient. Imagine a voter demonstrates broad understanding of where both candidates lie, facts on the issues at hand, and says, my primary motivation for voting for X is Y, is a disgusting insert character judgment here, and will ruin America, my state, whatever. It can be said that this person who does know factual background information is not objective and still using character assessment as a driving criteria. Is that bad? No, I think it's fair, but it's their argument, and it can be the basis of disqualification informally for a less informed and equally biased but more subtle, less passionate voter to say that, information aside, that voter is basing their decision on subjective, unproductive, i.e. the candidate, not their vision, insofar as these are separable, grounds. Wave rising. IMO. Education is less important than wisdom for this sort of thing. If it was me, I'd probably restrict voting to people aged 40 plus. Even that would be a fool solution and has its flaws, but I do think it would help overall, and as an added bonus, the youth of America wouldn't waste their time on politics and it would give the older population additional purpose. Maybe they'd actually take it seriously if that was the case. Hey, the trickster. That would be a major flaw if only older people could vote. A major problem we are having is the fact that a lot of older people don't look at how future generations will be affected, or don't understand, don't want to believe the new information coming out that changes what they believe to be correct when growing up. The same is true for the younger generation, believing they know more than the older generation simply because they have new skills and information the older generation doesn't. Any type of age, to a fair extent, gender or race restriction is a bad thing in my opinion. For one, the young can fight on wars, but you want to take away their ability to argue if that war is just or not? Wave rising. I don't understand this idea that older people don't care about future generations. The problem with younger people is that they lack perspective, even more so now with the technology developments of the last 100 years. It calls them to believe that we're different or evolved somehow from previous generations when we're not. Tech is a wonderful anesthetic, and of course it's preferable to have someone leading who is familiar with technology because that is the world we live in now. But if you're asking if I think that the knowledge is a qualification that makes a good leader, I don't think so. I guess I'll be the only one to say it. Yeah, young men should fight in wars and not be able to vote. Why? For the same reason that you don't make an 18-year-old an officer of a 25-year-old general. Young men should voluntarily fight because they're proud of their home, and if they're not, then perhaps they shouldn't fight. There is no reason why the concept of voting needs to weigh in with that decision. K, the trickster. I never said all older people, but I live in an oil town, and I've heard many arguments from older generations saying, we've always used it, so why stop now? Or I'll be long gone before it gets bad enough to stop using it. Or, yeah, it might be bad for the future, but if we can stop the economy, we'll tank. Older people should vote. They have the years of experience of the younger generation doesn't. However, younger people should also vote. They are the ones that know what they want the country to be when they are older. And they have modern knowledge that many older people might lack. FYI, you can be an officer at the age of 18. You just need a bachelor's degree to qualify to become an officer. Wave rising. After getting a bachelor's and going through officer training, I don't think it's possible to still be 18, but it's not an important point. Young people don't know what they want. Most have idealistic visions not based in reality. How could it be any other way? I don't think anyone whose life experience amounts to public school, video games, and a few retail jobs could possibly know what's good for the future for themselves or anyone else. K, the trickster. There are people out here who graduate with a bachelor's before they turn 17. With a parent permission, you can join the military at the age of 17. When you go through training, you are still considered that rank, even if you don't get recognized as it or have the full responsibilities of being an officer. So it is highly unlikely, but with how it works, you can be considered an officer at the age of 17. Even if you can't, you can still become an officer long before you turn 40. At the age of 30, 35, on average, people are much higher in rank and have had to make some major decisions that exceed any decisions an average 40-plus-year-old has ever had to make. Yet people think they don't have the right to vote because they are too young and inexperienced. Wave rising. Voting should be considered a larger decision than any made by a single military officer. K, the trickster. I don't disagree, so why would it be okay for someone who hasn't even made a decision on par with that of a 30 to 35-year-old military officer to vote, and not okay for that officer to vote? Little man 88. Most old people don't know what they really want any more than young people do. It's all ideals and surface level, short-term future thinking with the vast majority of people. It's why people still can't connect the dots and see how constantly lowering taxes just keeps making things worse, not better. Why they're still eating up that trickle-down economics BS. Age doesn't seem to naturally improve wisdom or critical thinking skills. The only thing it seems to guarantee improving is making someone more entrenched in their belief. Wave rising. Then maybe you're wrong. You seem pretty entrenched in your own beliefs. Little man 88. In this case, I can't really be wrong. As someone in their 30s, and really, where do we put these goalposts? I'm either already well on the way there and right by default due to wisdom, or wrong about what I said because I was right about age not amounting to any such thing. Take your pick. All I know is that the people who've ever been around long enough to learn a thing or two clearly haven't. AXI Pixel. This assumes that wisdom naturally accrues with age and nothing else, that elders aren't foolish just because they're elders. This really isn't true. People age 40 plus have voted for demagogues, populists, and fascists just as much as everyone else, sometimes even more so. Most of the votes for Trump in the US were over age 40. Education is everything. An old person is only wise because they spent their years learning. When they haven't, they're just as foolish as anyone else. The C questions. I'm deeply concerned by this line of questioning. It's the same question I get when I tell conservatives that media, social media, and the like must filter out misinformation, simply by asking who gets to be the arbiter of truth. They shrug it off and nothing is accomplished. Meanwhile, the cancer of misinformation and disinformation continues to spread through their communities, families, and minds, and so the gaslighting continues. At a certain point, something must be done about it. We don't ask, and who gets to decide if one is ready to drive a car on these roads? We do it despite all the imperfections inherent in the system. It should be true of voting as well. To put it another way, we have seen how voting by birthright has turned out time and time again. Why not try a new system with a specific set of standards? Say, 1, must have at least a bachelor's level education, no distinction between elite institutions and other public universities, including community college. Must have maintained a GPA of 3.0 or higher, must speak at least one foreign language or play one musical instrument, and must be able to get a 7 out of 10 or higher on the national voting exam. These would not be high bars for many people to reach, but at least there would be a set of standards to adhere to, and it's a set of standards that includes studiousness and appreciation of arts, culture, and dedication to learning. I'm not saying this should be the system, but the discussion should begin somewhere. Cade the Trickster. I agree completely. We need checks and balances in our voting system. My wife and I agree that only taxpayers should be able to vote, because if they are going to vote to increase taxes, they should be affected by that vote. Edit. Okay, rethinking. I must disagree on the college education requirement. People with jobs that don't require college could be smart enough to make good decisions, and people who haven't worked these jobs might not understand or see what it is like for that group of people, and that could lead to poor voting on the part of those with education. If we had a test one has to take when voting, it would weed people out who were just wanted to simply write a name with no thought, and it would show who has enough brain power to vote properly. Pennies for Gwen. But how would someone be deemed wise enough to vote? Does that automatically open it up to corruption? Even if there was a council who could make those decisions, it would doubtless be taken over by non-philosophers who likely would keep people from being voters if they knew they didn't agree on certain issues. Time cipher. Corruption usually involves trying to push the law to serve the few, something that a majority won't support. The odds of passing a law that would make the minimum wage $6,000 an hour would appeal to a wider audience and not necessarily intelligent. Pennies for Gwen. Then how do you explain the United States government? Congress serves the few, billionaires, over the interests of the majority of the people. Time cipher. That's not democracy or even voting based on intelligence. The problem is that these people are rarely wise enough for the decisions they make. Pennies for Gwen. So who decides who is wise enough to decide? Time cipher. I'm not wise enough to have that answer, and I don't think Socrates was saying there was an answer either. Many perfect systems only exist in theory, and only ever will exist in theory. Deleted commenter. The point is no one would be. The Republic culminates in Plato holding what he considers the most robust society, one led by a philosopher king, wise enough to manage the state appropriately, in a system overseen by the merit of its ruler. Democracy does nothing but dilute that. Plato's view of democracy is rather apparent, placing it one step above tyranny. Then again, that's not surprising given that it was corrupt democracy that put his teacher and mentor to death. Pennies for Gwen. Right. I know about the philosopher king. My philosophy teacher was religious, so he purported that to be Jesus, which I could see being true in theory, but yeah, as humans, we are kinda effed as far as having truly fair and just society on a large scale. Pennies for Gwen. But I also think it's one of those things where you try to, even though you won't achieve perfection, shoot for the moon and land in an asteroid belt. Laughing, tears, smiley face. Amit Botscript. So sad that this comment 2,000 years later should feel so poignant. Pouring energy into withholding the right to vote is clearly not the answer. The energy should be poured into enabling a varied and educated vote. Lumi Reaver. And also, Plato was an elitist, rogue consultant. I mean, we had Brexit in the UK as well as the Tory government, so makes sense. FD 43543. It's funny to see leftists agreeing with authoritarian aristocracy apologists like Plato because the people didn't vote the way they were supposed to. Who needs universal suffrage when you can just restrict voting to people you deem worthy of a vote? Everything comes full circle. Sea Shark. Criticizing the flaws in a system is not the same thing as thinking it should be replaced. Black and white thinking is not the only option, you know. Serious Mike, you are jumping to conclusions here. The problem Socrates was talking about, uneducated and uninformed voters, is real. Nobody is denying that. Voter restrictions is just the only solution that crossed your mind. There are ways to solve this problem that are far more appealing to leftists. For example, better education systems and adequate wages which allow voters to actually spend time informing themselves, or more transparency in legislation. Deleted commenter. You might want to read the rest of the Republic. Angel Hunter D. I'm getting tired of being funny. Maybe we should riot like they do and actually get something done.